of Auto Antenna. Thank you for being here. Radio report, strange powers by the magnetic fields plays. Driving down the dirt road, heading out to the main street is strangely comforting. Each bump a reminder that you're further out of those fully manicured social contracts of bigger cities. A little more like horseback, a little less like highway. I like the feel of the road under my wheels. I even like the soil kicking up in a mist into the air. It doesn't feel like dirt, it feels like movement. When you're surrounded by the country's high desert conditions, the desire to get out onto the cracked, clay-like land is strong. There's a national forest just 7 minutes from the center of town in Santa Fe, but it's a little less arid there. The easiest access to walking in wide-open desert terrain is the Frank Ortiz Dog Park, a 1.4-mile loop trail and well over 100 acres of arroyos and walkways, little birds, big birds, jackrabbits, and breathtaking views of the Jemez Mountains. Half trotting over to me, Tina is being dragged by Rolf, who by now recognizes me as his never-say-no friend, because I'm never in a position to have to say no, but Rolf doesn't think that. To him, it's all magic. His tail wags powerfully, his tongue full of wet, sloppy love. Rolf's humans are both artists, and I occasionally get to counsel them at no charge. I had originally met them on the open artist studio tours that happened at the end of summer when I walked into the casita they used to share, and they just handed me a joint as I entered. That started an immediate and long-lasting friendship. I created a unique major in my studies at NYU, combining psychology and art, which allowed me to find my calling very early in life to be a therapist specifically for creative professionals and the not-so-very professional. Traditional therapy tends to clump people into categories of normative and maladaptive behavior, and normative is a category most artists have no interest in conforming to. And maladaptive can be somewhat of a resource for the art mind, even if it's a crippling blockade for others. Not to mention that traditional therapists want to pull their clients away from living in a world of fantasy, whereas it is specifically my job to instead nurture that very same impulse. From the start, I understood how to motivate creative spirit in artists without boxing them into the triviality of pedestrian normalcy, which gives some an experience that feels like an idea of comfort, but our weird is our gift, our gateway to the art life. I made a career out of that rather than intermingle my own creative pursuits with the demands of commerce and industry, and I nurture my creativity any way it calls to me. But I didn't buy into the allure of that success dynamic, the mattering dynamic, the applause dynamic, which seem vestiges of a capitalist influence on defining what is essential. I thought instead, isn't it in the end about creating a beautiful life? JC is Native American, which is not uncommon here because there are 12 different tribal pueblos within an hour of Santa Fe. That's more than half the Indian tribes overall in New Mexico. What you learn fairly quickly is that they're not magical beings from the recesses of white imagination, but real people with their hilarity, their sorrows, their sex appeal, their politics, their often material aspirations alongside spiritual ones. And a few I know are really good bartenders, but despite the myth of alcohol metabolism making them genetically poor drinkers. JC's long, straight black hair and sleeveless tee could be punk, except he wears a cowboy hat, which is another thing that cowboy and Indian stories might have made you think was an uneasy pairing. But few in Santa Fe, unlike neighboring Texas, actually wear cowboy hats. And JC knows it's a statement piece with its long, flat brim. He blends cultures beautifully and at ease, and I adore him. I adore him for it. Man, I am in such a teetering tizzy of late, he says. It's at this moment that Tina and Rolf break away from us to greet a few canine friends further up in the brush. I have this gallerist who is kind of demanding that I complete more work in order to keep me on. But I make the pieces I do because they come out of my life. It's how I breathe. I give you my sculpture, I'm giving you my blood. And he says that makes me an amateur, that a professional can make art every day like a job. Don't say anything, Neil. Like making a pizza because there's an order for it on the phone. I was like, what? First thing to note is that JC's work is stunning and meticulous and of expert craftsmanship. The most recent pieces I saw included these fox-head men who lift their heads off their bodies. There's no gore or violence in it, it's just an awareness of persona, whose Latin root, interestingly, is mask, and is also called so by Carl Jung in his model of the psyche. not to mention the title of my favorite among the films of the great director Ingmar Bergman. The only relation to decapitation has to death in his art is the death of the illusion of the self, the construct. The removing of the head is a move of power to show mastery over identity, and the fox, a benevolence of spirit. He may one day make them on call, but for now those creatures are still building themselves in his psyche, each an individual that he must greet, respect, and learn from before producing its spirit's image into this world. Art is not like a restaurant where you serve up what you think the customer will want, which is not to be confused with entertainment. Unlike the latter, if you make something that other people think is terrible, then you have not failed. If the whole world disregards what you made, but it's beautiful to you and fills you with the appreciation for life, then you have succeeded wildly. It's if you change what you made to make them like it, but in the process no longer see the magic in it yourself, that is the betrayal. That is what Patti Smith refers to as success, and why the hard pill to swallow for any creator is it's part of the deal that people don't have to want to eat what you're serving. They are free to like gray and blue while you obsess over red, but then it's not their job to be you. And then sometimes they want it 20 years later when you've moved on to making other dishes, but all in love is fair. So successful have corporate agendas been in our culture that the concept of sellout has been supplanted and lauded as just being savvy. But not everyone who creates wants into the market, and the effect of the primacy of finance thinking, even in the realms that relate to spirit, is that surface engagement and impulsiveness, neediness and grabbing, even deception, are all qualities that often get rewarded as commerce motivating traits. But those all focus on exterior conquests and not where success more often resides, in the interior. And of course, this goes to the core of who we are. Your life is primarily a result of how you communicate with yourself. Despite the attempt by so many to try to define themselves by what they perceive as the effects of circumstances they've experienced, but your relationship to your own energetics informs how you interpret and then direct your life, and the spin you put on whatever happens plays a big role in what happens next. Now we go to the building of those internal states of mind through a sense of imagination. It's the beginning of a day. I turn the brass hot water spigot and wait for the temperature to rise. The shower wall has many adobe nichos with mosaic tile backsplashes on which are stashed an array of small decorative colored plastic bottles and vials with little genie tops. Encased within, a fine selection of fragrance, moisturizers, and essential skin oils, some filled with dreams and night stories, empty bottles of imaginary potions. The ritual of preparing for any day with all its possibilities starts here. I lather and caress. My wet hair kisses my neck. Flavors of jasmine, coconut, lavender each find a spot for world explorers to languidly come upon, where I am the earth's surface and they the fingers that reach, prod, and search. Each note of light fragrances penetrates the senses as innocently entrancing as a 26-year-old Joni Mitchell playing a dulcimer to enraptured audiences of the BBC. The bee enters the flower and gathers the nectar for future honey. I twist another bottle top. Angels meet you in these private moments that no one else sees of or knows of, the invisible caves of consciousness that others think are just nothing. No lightened being is mistaken on such topics, however. The timber of your destinies are made in those private gardens, not just life's outward battlefields and sanctuaries, or the hallways of business pavilions, where is found the conducting of so much professional intercourse. Unlike lungs, the skin breathes under the water, and I let out a sigh that could be misconstrued by listening ears. A hummingbird comes to the window to peek inside, for sweet water is what he seeks. Those tiny wings these tiny winged beasts can stick their tongues out for the elixir an incredible 17 times a second. The little heathens. The neck eases back in a circular motion to ingest the heat and transform its insistent pounding into oxygen flow. Turning off the shower, I leave my eyes closed. I listen to the universe where there's a balance you can tap into, the way a satellite stays spinning by moving in the same direction and speed as the Earth itself. It's a track you align with, an opening to a frequency, a sense of harmony. Now, there's nothing to hear, but there's a poetry of energy. You can listen to it the way you swing in a hammock and are gently rocked by it. Slowly rubbing moisture along the back ligament behind the knee and a different ointment just above the navel, where else might a wandering pair of lips find itself? A different fragrance there. I take by instinct a clash of color and pattern from the closet that match only due to my love for them, each piece with hand-sewn snippets and fibers affixed playfully to adorn. The car keys for Esmeralda are kept on the hook in the kitchen. That heavy turquoise door has become a symbol for adventure to me. And now for a bit of the journey hitting the road. Santa Fe has so many historical churches, including the oldest in the country, San Miguel Archangel, built in 1610. But as houses of worship go, my own secret pleasure award goes to that tiny private church that sits up in a hill by the side of the road called the Cerro Gordo Chapel near Canyon Road. Surrounded by barbed wire and built just from local boulders, it could only hold about 4 people, even if you could get inside. Barely a structure, it manages to still have "the dead depart, their works remain" inscribed upon it in Spanish, always with an eye to the sensibilities of the artist is Santa Fe. But I have a prediction that Raw Paulette's Windows of the Earth is about to take the throne in my mind for places to honor energy. Angus has been monk-like in his observance of the details of this hand-carved space. He mirrors the motions with his hand as if writing a letter in the air, using a language of ornate hand gesturing to communicate an appreciation for beauty. He looks over at me, speaking in silent vernacular through his eyes. This is something you see more in artists than art appreciators: brotherhood, with the spirit of fellow creators, not just the works they produce. One thing that makes these caves stand out in the modern world is the lack of convenience. There's nothing easy about them. There's no template to apply, no external coordinates to set in advance, and no aid from the genie in a bottle availed by computers. I look up at the light streaming down from the inlay windows that serve the function of luminance as it's intended in the building of churches, cathedrals. Not light for practical use, but for awe and contemplation, a coaxing out of the inner flame. And no real money to be made in constructing it. This is a laborer's wage that meets the daily need for provisions, but nothing sustaining beyond that. The payment, as it were, is in the doing. I tell you, rare is the artist today so aware that process itself is the primary purpose of creating, as both a meditation and a way of learning the coordinates of the true self, as well as to simply fascinate and challenge one's own mind. But in truth, fun is reason enough, isn't it? Come here, he says, stretching out his arm to hold me in it. The mirrors are genius to suggest water as the clouds from outside shift the light in this space. Stepping outside for air, the uneven texture of the ground against your boots demands as much of your attention as the huge blue sky overhead, and the amazement at the large oval windows in the sandstone butte of the castle, reminiscent of the caves of the Anasazi, another of New Mexico's most treasured destinations at Bandelier. There you can climb into the alcoves, dwellings carved inside the mountain walls, where humans settled, nestled within over 11,000 years ago, twice further back in time than even ancient Egypt. And now we go into Sibylline's interior by peeking into her journal. Sibylline's journal entry. Dreamt I was organizing a festival where various firefly tribes were making spectacular formations in the sky. Tracing the emotions I felt about this display, there was a sense of destiny being magnetized together, separate life journeys and passions mixing with a divine timing that was connecting all those little but critical dots, like watching active constellations moving into place, taking their positions across the Milky Way, each exerting some subtle influence. Thinking about the sheer beauty of the dream, I even talked to the postal carrier about the vision. He said it was exciting, that maybe I was sensing something big was happening, that a scene would develop that would ripple out, and wouldn't that be what we all needed? I didn't want to get into it, but it's quite the opposite. It's that something little is happening, that it's not about being seen, but about seeing better, hearing better, connecting to our information better. This little point, though, is one of the biggest things obstructing people's ability to find meaning in their lives and to identify a sense of sustainable purpose. If there's a big scene, it's recognizable. It has form and shape, and people identify it. Whereas if it's intimate and personal, it remains amorphous. So it's harder to point at and celebrate. But we must. The small conversation in the corner of the room at a party is so often more compelling and eloquent than what most may be paying attention to in the center of the room with all eyes watching. This preoccupation with magnitude is man coping with his cosmic insignificance, the solution to which is exactly validating that quiet voice, the vast inner world. It is, oh no! Okay, it is from there that the heart can speak with constellations. The castle at Kubla Khan in Xanadu and the entire 16-mile length of the wall that protected the ancient city, built to indulge the emperor's every fantasy, is now only visible by foot as a small hill covered by grass and the outline of buildings only visible from the sky. Even the most gilded treasure shall evaporate, the kingdoms, the empires, and yes, even constellations themselves, within 100,000 years, gone, transmuted. I drove the other day a mere 40 minutes to Manhattan Project Museum at Los Alamos and saw the letter to the president from Einstein, the scientist's description of the test explosion, and then the pictures of Japan from after the blast, paired with small installations with a jukebox and coffee tables where the secret society of this classified government research lab up in the mountains, then a hidden town with no zip code, hung out to pass the time. And as I drove out of there back to Santa Fe, felt the sense of triumph, awe, and yet complete horror each person must have felt driving away from that very site after the 3-year mission was complete, and thought of the secret projects so many of us work on in our art to further the missions we're called to, for us of the utmost importance, to direct the world, including our inner world, towards some purposeful future. Interesting also is how some of those involved thought the explosion might ironically go down in history as a great symbol of peace, that in the horror of the bomb's destruction couldn't paint a clearer, grimmer picture of where violent resolution of conflict leads. But of course, just as the woman I asked on the street about the location of the museum said, I've been a lifelong resident here and have never been there. We forget. So the lessons fade, and in that why recurrence is such a mark of human existence. So I return then to that central study of mine. Does this human culture progress? Ask ancient Egypt, which was so sexually permissive that lesbianism was referred to as the acts of Egypt, and where women were known to have multiple husbands, compared to Egypt today, where belly dancers are sent to prison for undermining family values. Ask the Roman Empire, after unprecedented prosperity and stability, how it was carved up by warlords and bandits into 800 years of barbarian grind with illiterate kings, the demise of sophisticated architecture and economic systems, and an absence of the rule of written law. And even at the height of the Romans' dominion, it was a far more depraved period of rule than the Greeks who preceded them, the inventors of democracy and philosophical ethics. Heading back to the city with Esmeralda's warm, familiar grumble beneath me, there was yet another one of those beautiful, sprawling Santa Fe sunsets. The thing is, it will all go by so quickly. We must appreciate our long view and the wind in our hair. Radio report 1,000 Suns by Casker plays across the color tones in the sky. Thank you. Thank you. And now I have just a little surprise for you. There's a whole soundtrack album, of which 3 of the songs, of course, are mine. So I'm going to try play you with this one little track here on the most sophisticated equipment that money can buy. Oh yeah, can you hear that? Yeah, kind of. It's gonna be ridiculously quiet, but I won't be. So this song is called Mystic, and it's one of the songs in the book. clothes aren't how you dress. No, they're an angel to your consciousness. Though you walk the road ahead, you live the dreaming and commune with long gone souls that follow wherever he goes. Well, you can sense them in a feeling. You're a mystic. It's like touching hands with the angels and the powers that be. You're a mystic. Set aside some time for dreaming. Only you can set yourself free. You dance upon the wind as if free of the world's sins, because illusion has no power, and the road is just a gift. The veil like the dawn lifts, because the darkness just doesn't matter. Hell, you're a mystic. It's like touching hands with the angels and the powers that be. You're a mystic. Set aside some time for dreaming. Only you can set yourself free. Yeah.